Trump threatens to attack the world's largest gas field if Iran attacks Qatar again. According to breaking reports from the Associated Press, the geopolitical landscape in the Middle East is reportedly facing an unprecedented and highly volatile escalation, opening with a stark ultimatum emanating directly from Washington, U.S. President Donald Trump has allegedly threatened to launch devastating military strikes against the world's largest natural gas field if Iran proceeds with any further attacks on the state of Qatar. This reported warning arrives in the immediate aftermath of a series of cross-border bombardments that have targeted critical energy infrastructure across the Persian Gulf, effectively plunging the region into what military strategists describe as a highly unpredictable new phase of modern warfare. To fully grasp the magnitude of this opening development, it is essential to examine the strategic value of the assets involved. As reported by AP News, the focal point of this tension is the massive South Pars natural gas field, an underwater reservoir territorially shared between Iran and Qatar where it is locally known as the North Field. Geologists and energy experts estimate that this single geological formation holds an astonishing 1,800 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, representing roughly 8% of the world's known reserves. It is the absolute lifeblood of the Iranian domestic economy and the foundation of Qatar's status as the world's leading exporter of liquefied natural gas, LNG, supplying upwards of 77 million tons annually to global markets. According to sources cited in the initial reports, the current cycle of escalation was allegedly triggered by a series of contested military maneuvers near these critical energy sectors. In what is believed to be a swift retaliatory posture, Iranian forces reportedly signaled intentions that threatened Qatari infrastructure. In direct response, President Trump's alleged ultimatum has drawn a definitive red line. Based on information from defense correspondents, the administration has indicated that any kinetic action against Qatari LNG facilities would be met with an overwhelming, symmetrical strike on the Iranian side of the South Pars field. Following the strict principles of objective frontline journalism, we must examine the narratives presented by both sides. On one side, U.S. and allied Gulf officials argue that this stern warning is a necessary, calculated deterrence posture. They assert that protecting Qatar's energy infrastructure is paramount not only for regional stability, but to prevent a catastrophic collapse of global energy supply chains that could trigger a worldwide recession. Conversely, Iranian officials and state-aligned media have vehemently denounced these statements. According to diplomatic cables and statements circulating in regional media, Tehran has allegedly characterized the U.S. threats as flagrant violations of national sovereignty and international law. Iranian authorities assert that their military posture is strictly defensive, aimed at deterring Western aggression, and they warn that any strike on South Pars would result in an uncontrollable regional conflagration. Senate again rejects effort to restrict Trump's war powers in the Iran war. As the military theater expands ominously abroad, a fierce political and legal battle is simultaneously unfolding in Washington over the constitutional framework of this escalating conflict. According to detailed reports from the Epoch Times, the United States Senate has once again rejected a targeted legislative effort aimed at strictly restricting President Trump's executive war powers regarding the ongoing operations against Iran. The joint resolution, heavily debated on the Senate floor, sought to mandate explicit, prior congressional approval before the executive branch could deploy further military assets or authorize any new offensive kinetic operations in the Persian Gulf. The motion was reportedly defeated in a closely watched vote, breaking largely along entrenched partisan lines. This intense legislative clash highlights a deep, enduring constitutional debate over the 1973 War Powers Resolution and the interpretation of executive authority in an era characterized by rapid, high-tech warfare. Proponents of the restrictive measure forcefully argued that the executive branch is allegedly bypassing the traditional checks and balances designed by the framers of the Constitution. Lawmakers supporting the restriction claimed that without congressional oversight, the current administration's actions could easily drag the American public and its armed forces into a protracted, multi-trillion-dollar regional conflict without a clearly defined exit strategy or legal mandate. On the other hand, opponents of the bill, including key administration allies in the Senate, maintain a fundamentally different strategic viewpoint. They forcefully argue that the commander-in-chief requires maximum, unhindered operational flexibility to respond to rapidly evolving, imminent threats in real time. According to these defense advocates, imposing cumbersome legislative constraints would severely paralyze the Pentagon's ability to act decisively, thereby emboldening adversaries and directly endangering the lives of thousands of American service members currently stationed in the Central Command, CENTCOM area of responsibility. As it stands today, the failure of this Senate resolution effectively leaves the current administration with broad, largely unchecked authority to continue managing the military campaign without immediate legislative hindrance. Escalating attacks on Gulf energy assets plunge the Iran war into a new phase. This failure to constrain military action in the halls of Washington directly coincides with a deeply concerning tactical shift on the ground. According to an extensive strategic analysis published by the Wall Street Journal, the escalating, tit-for-tat attacks on Gulf energy assets have effectively plunged the Iran war into a highly destructive, economically focused new phase. What reportedly began as surgical, limited strikes on strictly military radar installations and launch sites has now drastically broadened into an all-out economic war of attrition, severely threatening global energy supply chains. The macroeconomic ramifications of this tactical shift are materializing at an alarming pace. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow, highly contested maritime choke point measuring just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, has become the epicenter of this new phase. Historically, approximately 20% of the world's total crude oil consumption, roughly 21 million barrels per day, flows through this critical artery. According to field reports, recent escalations have led to an unprecedented number of commercial vessels being effectively hemmed in, unable to transit safely due to the persistent threat of asymmetrical attacks by drones and fast attack crafts. The Wall Street Journal reports that regional energy facilities, including critical pumping stations and desalination plants across the Arabian Peninsula, have been heavily fortified following alleged aerial incursions. It is crucial to look at this phase through a dual lens to remain objective. Regional Arab states, alongside their Western defense partners, accuse Iran and its proxy network of deliberately weaponizing global energy security. They allege that Tehran is actively utilizing economic terrorism to force a premature ceasefire, effectively holding the fragile international economy hostage to gain political leverage. In stark contrast, Tehran firmly maintains that its actions are legitimate, proportional self-defense measures. According to statements attributed to Iranian Foreign Ministry spokespersons, the nation is merely reacting to a suffocating, Western-led economic blockade. They argue that if Iran is forcibly prevented from exporting its own sovereign oil due to heavy international sanctions, they will naturally ensure that no other nation can freely utilize the Persian Gulf for energy commerce. U.S. weighs military reinforcements as the war with Iran enters a possible new phase. With global energy markets thrown into turmoil and diplomatic off-ramps seemingly blocked at every conceivable turn, the military calculus is rapidly shifting to meet the crisis. According to exclusive reporting from Reuters, the United States Department of Defense is currently weighing the imminent deployment of substantial military reinforcements as the conflict firmly roots itself in this volatile new phase. The pressing need for a recalibrated, heavier military posture is reportedly driven by both the dramatically expanding geographic scope of the attacks and significant logistical challenges currently facing the U.S. Navy in securing international shipping lanes. Based on insights from defense officials cited by Reuters, the Pentagon is actively evaluating the deployment of an additional carrier strike group to the Fifth Fleet's area of operations. This massive logistical maneuver would potentially introduce roughly 5,000 additional sailors, squadrons of advanced stealth fighters, and heavily armed guided missile destroyers into the theater. Furthermore, there are alleged discussions regarding the redeployment of advanced Patriot missile defense batteries and terminal high-altitude area defense (THAAD) systems to protect vulnerable Allied energy infrastructure across the Gulf. States from incoming ballistic threats. The debate surrounding these reinforcements is intense and highly polarized. Military strategists and Allied commanders assert that a robust, undeniable forward presence is absolutely essential for re-establishing deterrence. They argue that overwhelming firepower is the only language that will prevent further attacks on critical infrastructure and ensure the free flow of global commerce. However, This perspective is met with heavy criticism from non-interventionist groups and certain geopolitical analysts. Critics warn that pouring thousands of more troops and heavily armed warships into an already combustible, highly reactive theater could inadvertently trigger the very all-out, multi-front war they are attempting to prevent. They argue that any accidental miscalculation or misidentified radar signature in the crowded waters of the Gulf could easily spiral into a catastrophic, irreversible exchange of firepower. Blackburn's new AI framework seeks to codify Trump's wishes. While the armed conflict heavily dominates international headlines and daily Pentagon briefings, its powerful economic shockwaves are profoundly intersecting with domestic policy within the United States. According to a detailed policy report from Politico, Senator Marsha Blackburn has recently unveiled a comprehensive new artificial intelligence (AI) framework on Capitol Hill. While this may initially seem unrelated to a Middle Eastern conflict, this legislative push is deeply intertwined with the broader macroeconomic environment exacerbated by the Gulf War, specifically seeking to formally codify President Trump's highly publicized ratepayer pledge. The core issue connecting this domestic tech policy to the battlefields of the Middle East is, fundamentally, energy consumption. The rapid, unbridled expansion of artificial intelligence technology requires the construction of massive, sprawling data centers. These facilities consume staggering amounts of electricity, with some energy sector estimates suggesting that AI data centers could consume up to 9% of total U.S. electricity generation by the year 2030. Concurrently, with global energy prices surging wildly due to the systematic targeting of Gulf gas fields and the effective military closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the baseline cost of electricity in the United States is facing severe, unprecedented upward pressure. According to sources familiar with the legislative framework highlighted by Politico, Senator Blackburn's proposal allegedly aims to aggressively shield average American consumers, the everyday ratepayers, from bearing the heavy financial burden of the tech industry's exploding energy demands. The framework seeks to legally ensure that multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerates are responsible for funding their own independent power grids, rather than passing the surging, war-inflated utility costs down to working-class families. This aligns seamlessly with populist economic pledges to protect domestic consumers from utility inflation during a time of compounding, interconnected global crises. To maintain strict journalistic neutrality, we must look at the passionately competing views surrounding this domestic AI policy. Proponents of Blackburn's initiative argue that it is a necessary, highly proactive measure. They claim that by legally codifying the ratepayer pledge, the government can foster sustainable, responsible AI growth, while actively protecting citizens who are already struggling to cope with war-induced inflation and rising prices at the gas pump. Consumer protection groups argue that the financial fallout of the Middle East conflict should not be subsidized by the American middle class just so tech giants can train larger algorithmic models. Conversely, critics from within the Silicon Valley technology sector, alongside allied opposition lawmakers, warn that the framework could inadvertently stifle vital, cutting-edge innovation. They argue that heavily regulating how AI companies source and pay for their energy could cause the United States to lose its critical, strategic competitive edge against foreign adversaries in the global AI race. Furthermore, environmental advocates express deep, existential concern that the push for rapid, cheap energy to feed these massive AI data centers, especially at a time when global energy supply chains are so severely compromised by the Gulf War, might lead to a disastrous rollback of domestic environmental protections and a heavier, long-term reliance on highly polluting fossil fuels. In synthesizing these rapidly unfolding events, a highly complex and deeply volatile picture emerges of a world standing on the absolute brink of systemic disruption. From the alleged earth-shattering threats directed at the world's largest natural gas reserves to the fierce, deeply partisan legislative battles over presidential war powers in the U.S. Senate, the far-reaching ramifications of the Iran conflict are echoing across every single sector of global society. According to various international intelligence assessments and prominent strategic think tanks, the deliberate, calculated targeting of Gulf energy assets has undeniably pushed this war into a dangerous new paradigm. It is a modern era of conflict where critical economic infrastructure is just as heavily contested and just as vulnerable as traditional military front lines. As the Pentagon reportedly weighs sending further, massive military reinforcements to stabilize a rapidly deteriorating maritime security environment, lawmakers in Washington are simultaneously and somewhat desperately grappling with the profound domestic economic fallout. Ultimately, there are no simple, bloodless resolutions on the immediate horizon. While one side firmly claims these aggressive military deployments and economic maneuvers are absolutely essential for long-term regional stability, counterterrorism, and ultimate deterrence, the opposing side views them as reckless, illegal provocations that only serve to deepen the crisis and fatally threaten global security. As always, in the thick fog of war, the flow of information remains just as highly contested as the physical battlefields themselves. It remains to be seen whether quiet diplomatic backchannels can gain any genuine traction before this new phase of the war irreparably damages the fragile global economy. Until concrete, verifiable treaties are signed or irreversible military outcomes are decisively achieved, the international community watches with bated breath. The geopolitics of the Middle East are shifting faster than at any point in modern history. And as we have seen today, the ripple effects are already making their way into your local economy, your utility bills, and the global technological race. If you found this deep dive analysis valuable and want to stay completely ahead of the curve on global conflicts, defense strategy, and international policy, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a frontline report. We rely on your engagement to keep these independent, objective reports running. So let us know down in the comments. Do you think the U.S. should deploy more naval carrier strike groups to the Gulf to secure the energy markets, or is it time to prioritize a diplomatic off-ramp at all costs? Drop your thoughts below. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and we will see you in the next briefing.